F.J. Holden's, shark-fin glasses, and driving to the Gold Coast when it was a 2-lane road and only recently bitumened. Before seatbelts, I would lie down, stretch out on the back seat with its sweet smell of leather, sand and salt water still sticking to my skin. I felt loved, safe and protected. At the end of the day, the car would pull in under the house of the classic Queenslander with the wooden slats downstairs, those shadows in the sunlight. It was a place where we could see out, but the grown-ups found it hard to see in. On most nights I would be woken up by shouting. Standing in my cot, I would listen.
Fair's fair, Ronnie. Give it a bloody rest.
Not bloody fair. I've got his 3 kids and they still need an education. Bloody coppers. They're just lousy thugs.
They're not all bad.
Mick didn't deserve to die. I'm going to go on for compensation.
Leave it alone. Don't make things worse.
It's just not bloody right that no one pays for this.
You've got to be
I
reasonable.
will not be bloody reasonable. You're just sticking up for your lousy copper mate.
Oh, shut up, Ronnie.
Mum and Dad seemed so happy and so in love, but there was another man coming between them, a dead man. My mum's first husband, James Michael Jorgensen, or Jorgie as he was known by his Mount Isa mates, had been beaten by a policeman in the local watch house, and a few days later in hospital he died. There was a coronial inquiry into the police actions. The inquiry lasted for 2 years, from 1956 to 1958. But by then, all our lives had been tipped upside down. "1960 was the start of an exciting new decade. And for me, there was the prospect of going to school.
Quam admirabiles nomen tuum in universa terra, qui extuisti maiestatem tuam super celos. Ex ore infantium et lactentium, parasti laudem contra adversarios tuos, ut compescas inimicum et hostem. cum video celus tuos.
But the local Catholic school turned out to be a frightening experience. And Mum and Dad were arguing more and more. At school, it seemed like the whole world was going through a major anxiety attack. I now know that it was around then that anti-communist hysteria was really reaching its peak. The Cuban Missile Crisis was not something that I understood, but the local nuns were obviously concerned.
Sit up straight, young lady. Will you renounce Jesus, Debra, when the communists come?
That old Irish nun, with her wrinkly, freckled hands, held me up by my plaits so tightly, I still sit up straighter when I remember her. Dad was drinking more and more. I wonder if he ever sat at the bar of the National as his copper mates told their side of the story. One night Mum decided she'd had enough of the stress and the violence and the drinking.
Come on, darling. It's okay. Come with Mummy.
She took me from my bed, out the door and up the street towards the church. And I remember wondering who could see us as we scampered away. And I never saw my dad again. Queensland in the late 60s was already feeling the strong arm of the law. An ultra-conservative, Joe Bjelke-Petersen, was the Minister for Police and determined to keep young Queenslanders ignorant of the liberation sentiments circling the globe. Mum and I had gone to live with my grandparents at the very normal Norman Park. And I was becoming a young Queenslander who watched the nightly news and read the daily papers and found all these new ideas and images scary, but also exciting. "1968 was the year that the full hormonal rush of the menstrual blues hit me. I decided to get in touch with Dad. Somehow I got his address, maybe through my brother, and anyway, I made contact. He'd joined AA and wanted to communicate. It was a comfort to me in my constant state of pubescent highs and lows to read his ever-loving words. He seemed so good and true and important, especially at his mention of morning tea with the new Premier, Joe Bjelke-Petersen. The police force was cleared at the 56-58 coronial inquiry. Cleared at the 63-64 Royal Commission. The police charged were even awarded compensation for damage to their reputations at that one. But 5 years later, my mum and her friends were still sitting around their kitchen tables and laughing at how the big fella, Frank Bischoff, had moved on, but that the police minister had appointed Norm Bauer, Queensland's #1 crook according to the opposition, as the new police commissioner. The whispers around George Street were getting louder, and in May 1969, Bjelke-Petersen reluctantly handed his coveted police portfolio to Max Hodges. For 18 months, Hodges tried to work with Bauer. The early 70s were the Whitrod years, when even the police commissioner slept with a gun under his pillow. But I was a teenager and love and sex were on my mind, fed by the music, books and films of the day. In 1971, a South African rugby team toured Australia, and in Brisbane, the images of activist politics caught my eye. I don't know why Dad went back to drinking, but there was a lot going down in Brisbane that year, for both of us. I was in my final year of high school, and by the end of winter I was burying myself in books and wondering why the letters from Dad had stopped. I never got another letter from Dad because in October of 1971, just as the jacarandas were starting to bloom, leaning out a window and gasping for air, my dad died. In 1972, Australia changed, and so did I. And so did Queensland and its police force. It was time for a change, but there were those who wanted things to stay the same and were prepared to go to extraordinary lengths to maintain the status quo.
I was sitting home watching my TV when three fat pigs came busting in on me. We got you red-handed with 3 grams and a gun. Come on down the station, we're gonna have some fun. I was being bubbled, I was being framed. The cops had set me up, I was going down the drain.
By the time I was 21, like many of my contemporaries, I'd had enough of the violence randomly handed out by the Queensland police, of the paranoia and the fear. I was living in far north Queensland when one night, watching the TV news, I was stunned to see my Uncle Mark hitting a female protester on the head with his baton. The raid on the hippie commune at Cedar Bay was next. And then in July that year, Ray Whitrod resigned as Commissioner, citing political interference. And Joe Bielke-Peterson put Terry Lewis and the Rat Pack in charge of the state's police. And then it started, the right to march battles on the streets of Brisbane in 1977 and 1978. By 1981, the National Party ruled with 20% of the primary vote. In 1983, the union movement was attacked. And in 1986, the government built a road through the Daintree rainforest. Like many of my friends, I left Queensland. Bill Gunn saw the ABC's expose of police involvement in prostitution and drug dealing, and finally, a brave man set up an inquiry that would not fail to bring at least some of the guilty to justice. Like many, after the Fitzgerald inquiry, I returned, wooed back by the love I feel for the town and old friends and the good memories of being young here and full of life. And the election of the Goss government in 1989, and we were all dancing in the street. But a strange thing happened. Someone allowed the shredding of the special branch files. History was shredded. Why were those documents destroyed? Why do governments think they can erase the past? And the past exists inside all of us, inside our memories.